Mr. Cross, are you there?
I am here. I'm with you.
This is Dustin Wilmus from KMSU Radio. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I'll introduce you to my co-host, Ton.
Hey there, how you doing?
Great. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the line. If you're ready to go, we'll get started.
I am ready. I was just gulping down a gulp of coffee before talking to you.
All right.
Good.
Well, can you kind of give us a bit about your background, why you wanted to write this book, Here We Are Now, The Lasting Impact of Kurt Cobain?
I had been the editor of a magazine called The Rocket in Seattle, and we were the biweekly magazine there that sounded like City Pages or something, where we chronicled the local music and entertainment scene. And we were the first magazine to ever review Nirvana, first magazine to ever put them on the cover, and Kurt even was our customer. He advertised in our paper looking for drummers a few times. So, I'd chronicled this scene and knew everybody involved and just felt ultimately that some of the stories on Kurt were not right. So I wrote a book in 2001 called Heavier Than Heaven, which is, many people think, the definitive biography. This is kind of the follow-up to that. This is looking at the last 20 years, his impact on culture, and there are a number of things I found that even surprised me.
Well, yeah, and it sounds like you have been there from the beginning. Why do you think Nirvana had that impact that they did, and why are we still talking about them today?
Well, I think that ultimately comes down to those songs. Those songs have a relationship with their listener. When you hear Kurt, you truly believe that he is singing either to you or about you. Very few singers have that connection with their audience, where when you listen to the singer, you really feel you are getting them on the other side of the radio, the other side of the CD or computer speaker. With Kurt, you felt like he was with you. He was you. You knew him, you felt like. That was truly unique in rock, and that hadn't come along for quite a while. And that's one reason I think those songs have been so endearing.
Well, and I know you mentioned in your book that Kurt was kind of like the last rock star. Can you kind of describe what you meant by that?
Well, what I mean by that is not that there haven't been rock stars since, or that there haven't been people who've done things, that are interesting. But with Kurt, you got the combination of incredible songwriting talent, all that I just described about why his music connected with people, but you also had an incredible charisma. It was fascinating to listen to him talk. People loved to follow his interviews. There was something about Kurt that just was special, and you don't see that often. But I do think that technology has changed the capacity for a star to even be as big as Nirvana. Remember, they sold 30 million copies of Nevermind, and they were sold in a pre-internet world where you had to drive to a record store to actually buy the album.
Right.
Smells Like Teen Spirit sold 1 million copies of the single. And again, every single single was bought in a record store with somebody getting there somehow. That is so unlike today's world that it's hard to imagine it'll ever be recreated.
Definitely. Well, when it comes to Kurt's suicide, there's obviously a lot of conspiracy theories still out there about, maybe him possibly being murdered or Courtney Love being involved at some point. What are your thoughts on that?
There's absolutely nothing to that. I mean, I extensively researched Kurt's suicide. He clearly took his own life. There is no evidence whatsoever of anything else. I think those topics keep coming up, and people talk about it, and it ends up being in the news when somebody's trying to sell a book on conspiracy theory or here or there. Part of it also is we just simply don't want to blame Kurt. We want someone else to blame because of our own personal relationship with him. And, I think that what's true is that Kurt took his own life, and there's absolutely no evidence otherwise.
Well, you did kind of go into, I guess maybe you'd call them positives, if you can use that term, from his death. A lot of musicians now for addiction and stuff are treated differently, and I know you mentioned the suicide rate went down. Is there anything else that you can kind of see like positives coming out of this?
Well, to some degree, I think Kurt's death has made the debate on drug abuse something that, people are, kind of better able to talk about, I think. And, that's good. So, I'm happy that that's the case. So.
Well, in mentioning your book again, Here We Are Now, The Lasting Impact of Kurt Cobain, you actually had the opportunity to go through some of his personal belongings afterwards. Was there anything that you discovered there? You mentioned you were surprised by some of the things you came upon.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised to some degree when I found, even my perception of drug addiction. With Kurt, there is this sense that maybe he glamorized drugs, but he never, ever said anything glamorizing drugs. Instead, it was the opposite, where he really, really wanted to beat this addiction. He was just unable to. So, definitely something that it surprised me when I read how many times he pleaded to God to help him beat that addiction.
Well, and now afterwards, it's been 20 years, and sometimes you see Kurt's likeness pop up in some kind of unflattering ways. You know, they had the weird beer commercials we've seen him in, and that crying statue they built for him, which is kind of odd. I mean, what are your thoughts on some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think that some of my thoughts are, that what Kurt was able to do with these songs is he was able to tackle things that had not been, talked about in rock music. The very concept of what a pop song could be changed after Smells Like Teen Spirit. If you think of 80s music and horrible Bon Jovi and, girls and cars and partying and this hair metal band that was popular, Nirvana blew that away. It made that basically disappear.
So if he hadn't have died, do you think Nirvana would have carried on, or do you think he would have maybe moved on to something else?
Well, I think to some degree, Kurt would have, I think he would have continued to make music, but it would have been very different. It wouldn't have been the Nirvana the way that it was in 1991. The band was already shifting at the time of Kurt's death. He was more interested in blues and acoustic bass. He covered those Lead Belly songs. Kurt was sort of expanding his musical horizons, and I think that's where he would have gone.
Well, again, Charles R. Cross, the book is called Here We Are Now, The Lasting Impact of Kurt Cobain, and we assume it's at bookstores everywhere. Do you have a website we could check out?
It is, Charles R. Cross at AOL.com.
All right, very good. It's been great having you on today. Anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I just would say that, going forward, Nirvana belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's an exciting time. Even though it's a very sad legacy, thinking of what happened 20 years ago, it's still exciting that it's moving on and that, they're being honored that way.
All right, we are definitely looking forward to the book. Thanks a lot for being on with us.
You're welcome.